What's up, everybody? It's Demetrice and Anika here with Clair Em Motivators, back with your weekly dose of motivation, inspiration, and encouragement. And we finished our career series that we were talking about for the past couple of weeks. And this week and the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about boundaries, which is a very popular word. So I wanted to have a conversation with you and everybody else who's watching about what boundaries are and why they're important. And I remember when I told you that I want to talk about boundaries, you're like, "Oh, yes, Lord."
It's a lot,
Because I
a
think
lot
it's
of boundaries.
important. Like it makes a huge difference in your life, in your relationships, in your happiness when you have boundaries, when you know how to set them, when you're able to enforce them. It can make the world of difference for your own sanity. So the specific type of boundaries that we're going to talk about today, because it's such a broad topic that we had to break it down by category, we're going to start with talking about setting boundaries with your parents and with your in-laws, which if you are an adult and you have ever tried to enforce or set a boundary with your parents, oh dear Jesus. But I think that it is an area of conflict for everybody that I know, everybody that I've ever talked to or coached or whatever. There's always a portion where you're having to discuss whether you can have boundaries with your parents, how you set them, how you enforce them, and what you do when your parents are telling you like they don't care nothing about your little boundaries. So, but before we jump into that, I want to do the weekly what would motivate you most. So I'm gonna pick a question. What would motivate you most? Switching, would you rather, I guess, switch from being the oldest sibling to the youngest sibling or vice versa?
uh, well, I don't know. Okay, because I don't care what anybody
I
says.
think it's ironic that we got this
I
question for
know,
this
right?
topic.
Because being a youngest sibling, I'm the oldest sibling,
Hmm.
and I feel like for every younger sibling there is out there, that being the older sibling, you get to all the discipline, all the rules, all that stuff, and that's like sometimes like you're a guinea pig, and by the time the little sibling come around and don't have many little siblings, they don't like your parents have four kids. By the time
They
they
don't
get to
care
four,
anymore.
they don't even know where their kid is and what their kid is doing. So I want to try being a younger sibling because I think you guys have it a little bit easier because the parents by then they didn't tried it all on us, and so y'all get it easier. So I'm gonna be a younger sibling for once. I'm gonna try it out.
So it will motivate you, or you would rather switch from being the oldest sibling to the youngest sibling because you
Yes,
think somehow that I had it easier than you.
yes, because y'all are spoiled.
I wouldn't say all that, but I will say this. Poor thing, you definitely got, like you said, you got the trial run parent. Like, I'm not really sure what I'm
Yeah,
doing, so I'm going to try it. Stuff on you, or
yes.
like
And then
because
the
we're
parents go buy the book.
right
So whatever the book says, they gotta go buy the book for the first kid. So
by the time, because we're 4 years apart, like by the time she moved out, the rules that she had, I did not have.
no.
Like all the you
Your
have to have
curfew
curfew,
was
right?
not my curfew. Like my curfew was 7:30. Your
No,
curfew was didn't have no curfew.
no.
So see, that's not. I don't think that was
But I
fair.
feel like so ours was slight, and we definitely had that where like the rules were enforced with you. There were some hiccups that you and mom had that she and I didn't have because you already took all the brunt of all that. But one thing that I always give mom credit for, she never really made a distinction between us in terms of responsibility because you were the oldest and I was
Oh
the
yeah,
youngest.
no.
It was
Mm-mm.
always like y'all are sisters, y'all look out for each other, but I don't feel like, you had to do chores and I didn't. It was like,
Yeah,
no,
no.
y'all are the same. But when it came to the rules and stuff,
Yes.
I'm going to stay. So my answer to this question is I'm going to stay me. I'm going to stay right where I was, where I can sit back and eat my popcorn and watch, like, what is wrong with them?
See,
So
and that segues right into this
yes, it
boundary
really
conversation
does.
because for some of the boundaries I had to set, by the time y'all got to the same place in life, those boundaries are already
They were already
understood.
set. But then too, because we're different, like I'm sure we've had to set different boundaries just because we
Yeah,
want different things. So
yeah,
first, before we jump into that, I want to talk about what a boundary is, because I think people hear that term all the time. But a boundary really is like a rule or a standard that you put in place for your own sanity. I think it is the greatest act of self-love for you to decide, I'm okay with this, I am not okay with this, and to go that extra step of expressing that to your parent. And I think the first thing that you have to do when you become an adult is help your parent understand that you are an adult. I think that is the first boundary that you establish, that, hey, I am a grown up. So you cannot talk to me any kind of way. You cannot treat me any kind of way. I'm an adult. And because I'm an adult, we have to now redefine what our relationship looks like. Would you agree with that? Disagree with that? Add to it? What do you think a boundary is when it comes to your relationship with your parents and your in-laws too, for people who are
yeah.
listening?
I completely agree. And boundaries are personal because, like you just said, you may have a boundary that I may think, well, that's not, that's not a boundary to me. And so when it comes to boundaries, it's that definition for you, the individual, because not all boundaries are going to be the same. And so I'm setting it for myself. But like you said, to think about it as self-care, I never thought about it like that, but
It
that's
is.
exactly what it is, because it is your sanity that you're saying, okay, look, this is my sanity circle, and this is to get in my circle. It's like drawing a box around yourself.
Right.
Okay,
It's like a
get in this
literal
box.
boundary. Like I'm
Yeah,
drawing a box around myself, and in order
it's
for
a
you to
step
have
in it.
access to me, you have to follow the rules. I just shared this with you, but I think a perfect example of me, the first time I think I witnessed a boundary being set with a parent was being the youngest. With you, you had just moved out of the house. I think, no, you hadn't moved out of the house. You had been living out of the house for a little bit. But you were staying with Gavino, your husband now. And I was in the car with our mom and our stepdad at the time. And they decided, we were out close to where y'all lived, that they were going to stop by and surprise you. And we got there and knocked on the door. Everybody was so excited. Hey, we're here. And you looked and were like, hey, can you guys do me a favor? Before you come over next time, can you just call ahead and let me know before you just stop by here? And I don't think they said anything to you,
Yeah,
or maybe they just gave you a nasty look, but I got to witness the car ride on the way home, and they were livid. Like, how dare you, after everything that I've done for you,
yeah.
tell me that I
I
can't
got a
come see
call.
you? Right. What you mean I gotta call? You're my child. I don't have to call you. And I remember sitting in the car and being like, what is the problem? Like, that is a common courtesy, I thought.
Yeah,
But no, when it came to you establishing yourself as an adult, stuff that you would think like, I don't have to say this, you had to say. You had to be
yeah,
like, no, you cannot just come to my house without calling me. And that created, I don't, like I said, I don't know if they said anything to you, but behind the scenes,
yeah,
they were not happy with that. But I think that I've had to do that even now as an adult. I remember one time mom thought that I was upset, and she was texting me and she was like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm about to come over there. And I had to send her a message to say, hey, you cannot come to my house without my permission. And I'm fine.
yeah.
Don't come here. Don't come over here because I'm not going to open the door. And that, that sounds rude, but it can feel rude. And we had this conversation the other day where sometimes when you do have to be assertive in those moments, you do feel bad,
Yeah,
especially I don't know if other races experience this, but being from a Black family, oh, you do not disrespect your elders. Even if you feel like you are being disrespected, for generations before us, it was like, no, you respect, that's your mother, that's your grandmother.
yeah,
You don't talk back, or you don't do that. But in growing and maturing, it was realizing like, no, I have every right to speak up for myself. And that's not disrespectful, right? Me calling you out of your name is disrespectful. Me yelling at you is disrespectful.
yeah.
Me telling you not to come to my house without permission, that's not disrespectful. That's
Especially
about
when I said it in a nice way.
right. I said it nicely, right? Like I didn't say anything.
Yeah, I didn't curse you out. I
I
just
didn't curse.
said
I just said, hey, you cannot come to my house without my permission. But what do you think? What do you
Yeah,
uh
I think a lot of times with parents, just, you can think about all the big milestones in your life are going to be big milestones that you're going to have to set boundaries. And it's just because if you think about it from a parent perspective, and my kids are teenagers and Giovanni's 14, so I'm gonna have to play this video back for myself to make sure that I can respect his boundaries that he is going to set. But it's just, think about when a kid moves out on their own, and so those were boundaries that I remember having to set with my parents when I moved out. And like you said, one of them was just, hey, common courtesy. I'm not even just living here by myself. I'm living with someone else. So for just courtesy, make sure we're home for one, and make sure you're gonna catch us at a decent time for two. So maybe, just give us a call. But that's one, I think, moving out when you get married, because now if you're, especially if you're close to your parents, and I think sometimes too, the closer you are to your parents, then the more, I don't want to say the more boundaries you're going to have to set, but you're definitely going to have to set these boundaries because of the relationship you had before, and it's going to have to change and grow. So when you get married, when you have kids, oh my gosh, I can tell you 1,500 million stories about just trying to set the boundary as you saying, okay, I know you raised me, I know it worked on me, or I came out okay, because they love to say, well, I did that for you, and you came out fine. But it's like, okay, I understand that, but maybe just not, I don't want you to give him that, so will you please not give him that? So setting the boundaries for kiddos.
Let me let's park right there, because I think that is huge. There are people that I have coached, and there are conversations that I've had with friends, family, that when you become a parent, that is when the boundary setting has to be at an all-time high, and you have to be used to doing this, because it's going to come up. And the examples that you gave of something as simple as the diet that I choose for my children, right? I don't, for example, again, this is another one you had to experience first, older sibling. I don't want, your boundary was, I don't want my son at the time, because your daughter wasn't born yet. I don't want my son to drink any juice that's not 100% juice.
Yeah.
Okay, right? We grew up on Tahitian treat. It's all right. That's how our parents felt. But with you, you were like, no, I just want him to have 100% apple juice, for example. And then that being an issue of like, people give juice behind your back or whatever. And I never understood it, because for me, and I've always told you this, if you leave your child with me and you say at 3:00, you need to jump up and down 13 times and clap your hands twice. No questions asked, I'm doing it. In my mind, I might be like, this doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to do it. The parents don't necessarily see it.
I think it's because they raised you, and so you to them, because me and you, I think about are on the same level. You know what I'm saying? So like you said, if you tell me you don't even think about it in that way, this is your child. But I think when it comes to the child I raised you, then therefore I know what I'm doing with the child that you had. I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet.
I can't even rationalize it that way. But diet is a big one. And another one is discipline. So for example, we don't spank our children. And I had to let my parents know, hey, when you watch my children, do not hit them, right? Do not put your hands on my child. That can be an area of conflict. If, like you said, if your parents are like, well, I raised you, or I really do think that parents take it as a personal attack on their parenting. You're like, look, this doesn't have anything to do with you. I'm not criticizing you and how you raised me. I'm not saying that, well, I mean, you may have your, but this is not about you, right? Like, this is what my husband and I have decided to do for our child. And you either get on board with this or not. But that is a huge area of conflict. And I've talked to other moms who all say the same thing, that diet and discipline are probably the biggest areas of conflict, because they feel like their parents don't listen to them.
Yep. Another one I think too are like we had talked about earlier, traditions and like holidays and stuff, because it's things that, especially when you come together with another partner, you're bringing two households together. And so not everything that he did with his parents and his family, or not everything I did with my family, is going to be what we're going to do. We oftentimes kind of blend it, and we find our little tradition. So I think sometimes with parents, especially if we have done it this way all of your life, and now you're telling me you're going to do it a different way, that doesn't always go over so well. And so that's another area of conflict, where you're having to kind of set a boundary to say that this is what we are going to do, this is how we're going to do it.
And like you said, I think one of the hardest parts about marriage is you taking the way that you were raised and coming up with new traditions for your own family with your partner. You can't just do things the way that you
Yeah.
want to because there's another person here that you have to respect. And sometimes I didn't feel this way, and I don't think you did either. But for some people, they feel guilty when they have to let go of those family traditions. So, for example, for us, we always saw our grandparents and our mom on Saturday.
Mhm.
Well, when you got married and then, I got married and we had our own families, Saturday was the only time that we had to spend time with our own family. So then it became, hey, look, we're not going to be able to continue to do that. And people get, in their feelings
Mhm.
about it. And you can't feel guilty because you're like, look, I enjoyed that. But for the sake of my own sanity and my own household, I'm going to have to redesign,
Yeah, what it looks
what
like.
we're doing. Or you think holiday traditions, that's a big one too.
Yes.
When you are with someone else and you're trying to figure out whose house do we go to first and how long do we stay, those are areas that are ripe for conflicts. But in terms of boundary setting of what we're talking about, you have to speak up and know, this is what it is. And you have to be
Yeah.
able to communicate that, because if not, you're going to have unnecessary conflict in your house and with your parents,
Oh,
because
yes.
you're going to constantly be fighting over it.
Yeah. And I think too, the more traditions you have, because I think that's why I think our spouses may have had it a little bit easier to kind of integrate some of what they were doing because we had traditions, but let's say we have about five. But like take Gavino, for example, they probably got about 25. And
Right.
so it's trying to marry some of those ones and then and some of the ones that he had that I didn't have. That's where it's easy, where he had this tradition, but we don't necessarily have a tradition. It's easy to blend those. But it's when you have this like holidays. That is a perfect example because we're going to celebrate Christmas, Thanksgiving. So those are big ones that you do have, that we have to try to figure out and blend these and figure out what works. But then once we figure it out, that's only half the battle because now you got to go back out to each set of parents to say, hey, this is how we're going to spend this holiday. And like I said, that doesn't always go over so well.
So another one, speaking of the holiday thing, that made me think about like in-laws. So
Mm-hmm.
I know, like I said, with parents, discipline, diet for when you become a child, just getting your parents to see you as an adult. When you become a parent, when you have children, is what I was trying to say. Um, Another big one for people is in-laws, like establishing boundaries with your in-laws, and that being an area of conflict, especially if you and your partner aren't on the same page,
Oh,
right? So
yes.
imagine if you are married to somebody who's really close to their mom and their mom continues to do things that you don't like. Maybe his mom is coming to your house without calling, right? It's easier for you to have a conversation with your own mom, and
Mhm.
that's still hard, but like it's easier than for you to ask your spouse to have a
Yeah.
conversation with their mom, or
Or you
depending
have a
on, yeah,
conversation.
depending on what y'all's relationship is, you having a conversation with her to be like, hey, and then there becomes this battle of like you fighting with
Yeah.
your spouse's mom,
Yeah.
trying to establish boundaries. I didn't have to, Chris's mom passed away before we even started dating, but talking to my friends, like I said, coaching people, that is a area that you just like, oh, I pray for you because
Yeah.
it's
How do
hard to
you, yeah.
do. But I mean,
Yeah.
for, like I said, for your own sanity or for the sanctity of your relationship, you and your spouse have to be on the same page, and y'all have to be able to communicate that to your in-laws, what's okay and what's not okay.
Oh yeah,
That is stressing
absolutely.
me out just thinking about
I
it.
just say because if you don't do it right, it's conflict in all those relationships. Now you have conflict in relationship
Right.
with my
And now you're
in-laws.
miserable.
Yeah, I'm fighting with my husband. Now I'm fighting with my in-laws, and so you have to. And although it's uncomfortable, just think about how uncomfortable it's going to be at odds with everybody.
Exactly.
That's even more uncomfortable. So
Right.
pick the lesser of the two evils.
Right. So, in terms of how to do it, I wanted to provide people with some of our tips on this is how you do it. Having been an adult for a while, having been married and having had to have these conversations, with our own families, having coached people, one of the biggest things that I will say is you have to clearly state what the boundary is in some situations. There are some situations where, you know, I think you can expect, like, this is common sense. I shouldn't have to say this, but even then, I am an advocate of clearly state upfront what your boundary is. So for example, as a, with you and your children, if you don't want someone to spank your children, when you drop them off, even if nothing's happening, you have to say like, hey, we use timeout. So if they get in trouble, just, give me a call and I'll talk to them, or you could go ahead and put them in timeout, and then just be prepared for whatever conversation that's going to lead to. But I think if you don't say anything, you're leaving that area ripe for conflict because you didn't establish upfront what your boundaries were. Or with diet, you have to, clearly spell out for people, this is what my kids can eat or not eat. You don't have to worry about this anymore because your kids are big. But
Yeah,
for people
but
with small kids, it's like, no,
yeah,
you have to be able to specifically say upfront, whether it's this or something else, you have to clearly state, this is, like you said, that box that you're putting around yourself, this is the rule, right? This is
yeah.
the line. This is what I want.
Yep. And like we said earlier, boundaries you have to realize are almost personal. So if
Right.
you don't say it, you have to understand. I may say whoop that whooping my child is okay, and you may not, and you may think that that's okay. Or mom, our grandparents would whoop us, or whoever she left us with. They come. It takes a village. So whoever, if you find them doing something, then you spank them. But that boundary is not the same for us. And so if you drop them off to a mom, and our mom thinks that everybody in the neighborhood can whoop a child, and you don't say, "Hey, mom, just I don't, we don't spank them." I don't know how you would think your mom is supposed to know that if
Right.
you don't tell them that, or whoever, dad, mom, whomever you're dropping them off with,
Right.
or in-laws. You have to be able to tell them, because you're assuming otherwise that they feel that boundary is the same for, or you are assuming y'all have the same boundary, and that's
Same,
not
right.
always the case.
I have you may have a different opinion about this. I'm a person who feels like you should be able to have a conversation about anything, even the tough
Mhm.
stuff. That's the whole reason why we're doing these videos, to encourage people to have conversations. I do think that there are times when you should explain why. So for me, for example, I've had conversations, not in the moment where I'm like, hey, we use timeout and my kid are in trouble, so let's have this conversation about why. But just a philosophical, abstract day conversation with moms, be like, hey, I don't spank my kids, and like, here's why. And she and I have discussed, like, this is why I have this standard. And she understands why I feel the way I do, which we can talk about that, later. But she understood why. And so I do think there are times when you do establish those boundaries where you have to say why. You, for example, have a boundary that we all know, not to text you early in the morning, right? So don't text you at 6 a.m. Well, there was a time when you had to say that. You had to
Mhm.
say that. Oh, God, rest her soul. Our grandmother would call us at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. She
3
call
o'clock
you at
in the
5
morning.
o'clock in the morning, just ready to talk. You had to tell her, like, hey, I have to work in the morning, or I'm tired and I can't go back to sleep if I hear my phone. So please don't text me. Well, you explained why. You didn't just say, man, don't text me.
Yeah,
Like, why are you texting
yeah,
me so early? You said, this is why. And I think you waited to realize, like, okay, I know you don't want anything. You're just doing this.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Because them phone calls in the middle of the night, I'm always thinking that's reserved for bad stuff, like when
right.
you need to get up and flee. But you're just calling me to say good morning, and
Just
it's 3 o'clock
because.
in the morning. And then they say, "Are you up?" I am now.
I am
I
now.
am,
What would you like?
and I
Right.
will be.
So I think that, in addition to clearly stating what it is, if you want to explain why and have a conversation with the person as to why it is that you have that boundary. And then the next thing that I have is that you have to be prepared for the response and the consequence, and understand that people can choose to abide by your boundaries or not. And you have to decide what that means to you for your relationship with them, right? So if I tell mom, hey, for example, don't text me at 6 a.m., and she says, no, that's the time that I operate and I need to tell you something, I'm going to text you at 6 a.m., I have to decide what I'm going to do next, because you can't make people
Mhm.
follow your boundaries, right? All I can do is tell you that this is what it is, and hope that you love me enough to respect it. But ultimately, I can't make you do it. And so I have to decide, okay, this person has either said they're not going to follow it, or they keep showing me that they're not going to
Yeah.
follow it. So how do I enforce the consequence? So maybe you have to block her number from 6 a.m. to, 8 a.m. so that she can't text you. Maybe you have to put your phone on do not disturb. Maybe, you express to her like, hey, if you keep doing this, then whatever the consequence is that you want to impose. But there has to be some form of enforcement, right? Like, you can't just expect people to go along with it, or not be prepared for people to say like, no, I'm not going to do that. And
Yeah,
I
and
think a lot of
sometimes,
times people don't tell you that they're not
yeah,
going
I was just
to.
about to say
They
they
just
don't say
don't
they're
do
not
it
gonna do it. They'll say yes, and then they say, okay, I hear you, and then tomorrow
and
at
just
6
do it
a.m. they
anyway.
text you. So they don't always say, I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah. Well, I just think you consistently have to enforce it.
Oh
Like if you
yeah.
say, don't text me at 6, one, then you don't text them at 6. You don't, goes both ways. And then don't respond. Like
Yeah.
if you saying don't text me, but then you get the message and you respond to it, well, you're sending that person, your mom or whoever, the message that that's okay.
Yeah,
So
I always think of that as a boundary has to be important for you, because otherwise you're not just, most people are not going around just setting boundaries. Like my square is not as big as, Texas or something.
right,
My square is a little square. So there's certain things that I would like or I want to keep my sanity, but it's not everything in the book. So then those boundaries that I do set, you're going to have to keep reinforcing them, but they're also very important to you. And
right.
so that's why you continue to keep reinforcing. I'm not being unrealistic in what I'm asking. Hopefully, I'm not being unrealistic in what I'm asking.
Right. And we can go into detail with this because I actually got a question from somebody, but it's related to a spouse. So I'll tell the
Oh,
details
okay.
when we get to that. But the point of that situation was somebody asked, what is the difference between just setting boundaries for your sanity and people that are controlling? Because there are people who are like, I don't like this, I don't want that,
Yeah,
don't do
yeah,
this. And people, yeah, they ain't keeping up with all these rules to have you have a relationship with you. I don't have time for all that. And so there, like you said, obviously there's a difference, right? These are things that are affecting my
yeah,
wellness, right? Like I can't sleep because of the time that you're texting me. You're disrespecting me, right?
yeah,
You're coming to my house unannounced and I'm not there, or it's creating issues for me and my spouse. Like it doesn't always have, because I think sometimes you are going to have just little quirks for yourself that just
yeah,
like, hey, I don't like that. So please don't do that. And I feel for parents because they have multiple children and we don't have the same
yeah. The
boundaries.
same thing.
I
So they're
don't
like,
care.
oh, they probably got a list. Like, okay, which kid? Okay, she don't. She said that's fine. She said that's not okay.
Right. But I don't know. I think that in the same way they want us to respect their rules and stuff when
Yeah,
we're kids, the tables turn. Now that I'm an
yeah,
adult, you have to respect the square that I've built around myself. And if you want to continue to have a healthy relationship, then
yeah,
that's going to come with respecting boundaries with the understanding that I'm never going to ask you to do or not do something just because I feel like it, just because it
yeah,
annoys me. Like in any relationship that you have, there's going to be conflict and somebody's going to do something that annoys you. Like the point of boundaries is not to create a heaven for yourself where no one gets on your nerves, right? Like that's not even
that
possible.
ain't even realistic.
Right. But it is to, like I said, it's an act of self-love to say, like, this is affecting my wellness. Like, I
Yeah.
cannot sleep. I'm annoyed all the time. You're frustrating the crap out of me. You're causing me and my spouse to fight. You're, physically harming my child, in my opinion, because you're hitting them. It's those that you have to be able to stand up for yourself and say no. And my favorite word to give when I give advice to new parents is to be unapologetic. Like that is the word that I use for myself. When I have decided that something is important to me, I am unapologetic about standing in that belief. So if I say, do not do this to my child, I am unapologetic about asking you to do that. And whatever that means for our relationship, if you violate this boundary, I'm okay with that because I've decided that this is that important to me. So, and the people around me know that. Like I've explained why, we've had conversations about it. If you continue to violate it, I am perfectly comfortable with saying, hey, we need to have a conversation because this is not okay. But I do understand that there are people who struggle with people pleasing. There are people, like I
Yeah,
said, who have to unlearn what we were taught as kids, that you don't be disrespectful, you don't talk back, you just let your parents do whatever. There are people that still live in that space. I talk to them all the time.
yeah.
So I recognize that it's not easy, but we just wanted to give you guys some hope. One, to know that everybody deals with this, and then two, to know that you absolutely can get to a place where you don't worry about people pleasing and you understand that it's not disrespectful for you to stand up for yourself and say no.
Yeah, so I'll
Dad,
speak to that
in-laws,
because if for those of you all that's been watching us this whole time, I'm not one for confrontation. I'm not. I am not.
she
I
hates
am like rainbow and sunshine and
it.
Skittles. Like that's my world. I want, but setting the boundaries is one that I have been able to do and not feel guilty about it because I'm not being disrespectful. I'm
Right.
not being disrespectful, and like I said, that is very important to me, because otherwise I'm not around here telling you 1,500 things that not to say to me, do to me, or whatever the case may be. So it is one for all of you all that are people pleasers, or if you like me and you do not like confrontation, it is one that it's peaceful. It is peaceful. I don't care what anybody says, it is very peaceful when you're able to successfully set a boundary so that you and your parents and you and your in-laws can exist in a space that is beneficial for you both. You know,
Right.
this is a relationship, and I always think relationships, like any relationship, are not automatic. Even as, you know, parents, you think, okay, this is my mom, I automatically have a relationship. That's not the case. And so I always think about, I work on my relationship with my husband all the time. My mom's relationship deserves that same work. So does the work with my in-law. They deserve that same work. So it's not automatic because these people are my parents, or my in-laws who I see as parents. It's not automatic. And so they don't know what I like or don't like if I don't tell them. Same for them. They set boundaries for us and we respect them too. So it works. It definitely works. And even if you are one that's not confrontational, it don't have to be confrontational, but
Right.
conflict, you know, even for ones who you want everybody, you don't want to make anybody mad, or you don't want to make anybody upset. Like I say, if you don't do that, then you're going to be the one at home, and it's not going to be rain and sunshine. I mean, it's not going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's going to be hailstorms and snowstorms all inside your body because you're sitting over here like, shoot, I should have said something this time. So
Right. Well, and I think your peace is always worth it, right? When you
yeah,
say that and you're like, do I want to deal with this or do I want to have peace? My
yeah.
peace is always going to be worth all of the work that it takes to exist in a space where
Mhm.
I'm comfortable. And I think that the goal for every relationship, parents or whomever, should be to get to a place where you're able to resolve conflict. I think that is the healthiest skill that anybody could have, is to know how to resolve conflict. And when it comes to setting boundaries, naturally it's going to come with some conflict depending on, what the situation is. But the greatest skill that you can have and the greatest peace that you can give yourself is being able to work through that, and just learning as you mature that you have to teach people how to love you and you have to
Yeah,
teach people how to
it's
respect you.
not automatic.
Right. And like you said, it's not automatic. It's not oh, because you're my mom, I owe you this, or because you're
Yep.
my dad, I owe you this. It's like, no, we have to work at this relationship to keep it healthy, the same way that we have to work at every relationship in our
Mm-hmm.
life. It's not just, oh, well, I have to deal with this because you're my family. I have to just take it because you're my mom. I just have to deal with this because you're my dad. And it's a whole lot easier to do when you do have independence from them, right? Like, I'm not financially dependent on my family, and I'm not, for some people, for example, their parents watch their children while they work. So it's going to be a little more difficult for you to impose the boundary, because you can't say, well, you just won't see my son then. Well, who gonna watch your son while you work? So you have to be creative, but I think that it's worth sitting down and having the conversation and knowing that for us, before we matured, it was like, we don't, just avoid the conflict at all costs. I'm just not going to say nothing because I'm not trying to fight with you, because I already know if I say something, it's going to turn into a whole situation. So let's just not, we don't want to deal with that. But then you have all of these elephants in your room, and when you, like I said, you grow up, you mature, you understand, like, no, I can say something. They don't have to be a drag
Yeah.
out argument. I don't like this. Can you please not do this?
Yep.
And that's
Period.
it. Right, period. I know I said, can you please, question mark, but that was a period on the end of that.
Yeah,
Don't do
that's
that
a
to me. I
rhetorical
don't like
question.
it. Right.
Yeah,
Or
that's a
just
rhetorical
expressing
question.
like, hey, I think this, is disrespectful, and you work through it. It's not easy. If you need the help of a professional, get the help of a professional. Go sit down with a coach, go sit down with a counselor, go sit down with somebody to help you, because the goal for everything that we talk about in terms of the wellness, in terms of career, the goal of all of this is for you to have a peaceful life. Period. And one of the ways that you do that is by establishing boundaries, and it starts with your parents.
Absolutely.
Literally, the day that you pack your bags and move out of the house, you just
Get
read
ready.
Boundaries 101 and start getting ready to say, hey, don't just come by here, or I'm not always available when you call. That was a big one for me, that people would just call and then leave you a nasty message when you don't answer
Yeah,
the phone. And it's like,
yeah.
oh, I'm an
And
adult. I
let
was
you,
working. I was taking a nap. I didn't feel like talking. Whatever the situation
yeah.
was.
And when you miss that first family event, go ahead and get
Oh
yourself, get your
man.
pen, get
Mm-mm.
together, because that's
What
always
do you
one that's,
mean you're not coming over for
oh,
Thanksgiving? What do you
oh
mean you're
man.
going to so-and-so's house first? What do you mean you're going to stay there
Yeah,
for 2 hours and only going to be here for 15 minutes?
You know what I just thought about with COVID? You know, you probably out there have had to set some boundaries with COVID that you normally wouldn't set, but it's because we're in a pandemic. Because not everybody, we don't all feel about the pandemic. You know, it's not that we don't all feel the same. And
Right.
so for me, you know, sheltering
AKA
in
some
place.
people are following the rules and some people are not.
Yes, you know, it is what it is. But you know, I may be sheltering in place and saying, hey, I'm not going anywhere, but that's not the sentiment of everybody around you. And so you got to set a boundary that you would not normally set because that's not normally that's not
Right. You're
normally
not
something
doing
that you
it.
do, but you in a whole pandemic. So
I think the
people have
pandemic
probably
has
been,
made it easier for some people too, because some
yes,
stuff
this
you
is
don't
true.
have to.
Yeah.
It's giving you the reason when it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you're not coming over. No. How many people did you say were going to be there? No, sorry.
That's the first
Doctor
question
said
you
I
ask.
can't.
Is
Right?
you all
Like I don't
coming?
have to explain. No, I'm not coming. So I think it's, it's made it harder in that regard when you do have people that some are okay with the big gatherings and some are not.
Yeah.
And then for me personally, it's just been like, I send people a link to the CDC when they can't come over.
I come.
No, sorry, I won't be there. So, but we wish you all the best as you try to establish those boundaries, but really sit with yourself and ask, like, okay, this is making me feel this way. Like, why is it that you are imposing this boundary? If it's that you can't come over without calling, if it's whatever it is, really ask yourself, okay, like, why am I doing this? Why am I saying this? How is this making me feel? And then, challenge yourself to have that conversation with your parents to be like, hey, look, I can't. I just thought about this. We're gonna talk about this forever. But I've heard of situations where your parent blames your partner, right? Because
Yeah.
they think like, well, before you were doing this, and now you're dating so and so,
Yeah.
and
Now you
all
can't.
of a sudden you telling me that I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
So there's so many scenarios that are popping through my head when it comes to people setting boundaries with their parents. But I think the biggest takeaway that I want people to know is that you can do it. Like,
Yeah.
not like a, oh, hoorah, you can do it, but like, it's not disrespectful to set boundaries with your parents,
Yeah.
period.
Yep.
So accept that, get that in your mind and get to work and decide what you're okay with, what you're not okay with. And then mom, dad, don't do this anymore. I don't like it. Or mother-in-law, father-in-law, whoever. This is not working for my relationship, because ultimately your sanity is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
So with that, we hope y'all have a great week thinking about boundaries and setting those boundaries with your parents. The next one we'll do probably is with your partner, because I think it's a whole different set of rules when it
Yeah.
comes to setting boundaries with somebody that you live with
Yep.
and that you love and that they have their own
Yep.
set of boundaries. So
Yep. 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 That'll be a topic. You need some water for that one. I'm pretty sure that's one that's gonna make you thirsty, make your mouth dry all the talking
I think
about
that
it.
like I said, and I think that's why it's so important, because it is very hard to do. But when you think about these and you're like, oh my God, I remember this situation with my parents. I remember this situation with my spouse. I think about this situation with my friends. And it all comes down to
Yeah.
having and imposing healthy boundaries. So
Yep. Yep. Yep.
yeah, but let us know in the comments some experiences that guys have had. If you don't want your parents to see it, just say a friend of mine, and we'll know that means that your parents actually did that to you. We're interested to know what you guys are dealing with, how you deal with it. What are some boundaries that you have? Let us know in the comments, and we'll be back next week for another Motivation Monday. Bye.
Bye.